This is a 25 marker from paper 3 of Edexcel. It reads, evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic strategies that could be used to promote development in Kenya or another developing country of your choice. So I always suggest that you try and answer this question yourself and then come back and look at the video and see how your answer compares to mine, just so you have sort of a point of comparison for what you're writing. And if you come up with arguments that are different from mine, maybe put them in the comments so that other people can see them and get a sense of like the different arguments that are out there, and also like, then we can have a discussion about maybe what the best ways to answer this question are. We can have a look at each other's arguments. So I'm always going to want to look for splitting up my two main points into micro and macro. So in terms of a micro strategy, I'm probably going to look at subsidizing core industries to try and reduce their costs and increase their output. And then for a macro strategy, I'm going to look at developing human capital. So this will be investing in education and healthcare to try and improve my long-run aggregate supply. So in terms of analysis for topic A, I'm thinking in terms of subsidies for core industries would allow them to be more price competitive, which will result in greater demand and also done domestically. And also it's going to permit them to be more price competitive abroad. So maybe we're able to export with these industries, and exports would provide a source of revenue for the economy, boosting domestic AD, right? So I can go a bit into macro here because this is blended as a question. I do want to kind of stay within the micro components. So another effect that I think we're going to have from this is firms now may be able to achieve meaningful economies of scale because the subsidies allow them to invest and increase production, allowing them to become more competitive in the long run. And this is a key source of domestic investment. So I also want to sort of make sure that I'm focusing in on the fact that this is a developing context. And that means kind of two things in this context. The first is that in the long run, these firms could become a source of meaningful investment where savings rates are low. So a lot of times what will happen in developing economies is there'll be low rates of savings because people don't have very much disposable income, so they can't save very much money. That means the investment pool domestically, things like pensions and ISAs that we'd have in the UK just aren't as much of a thing. There's low levels of investment, and that sort of is a hindrance to economic growth. So maybe firms investing in increasing output, that's a very meaningful source of investment if we can get these firms to be big and profitable. And then the other thing is to say that at a smaller scale, fledgling firms in developing countries face challenges with limited infrastructure that make it hard to compete with foreign firms. So again, subsidies are maybe an important way of overcoming those challenges and getting firms to a position where they can actually really become competitive internationally. And so for definitions and diagrams, I would be thinking in terms of like defining this. Maybe I want to look at like defining terms like subsidies. I might be also looking at stuff like import substitution. This is kind of a version of import substitution. It's kind of a version of protectionism as well. So I might define protectionism. Even though I'm not imposing trade tariffs, I am sort of giving my firms an edge compared to foreign firms by providing them with direct subsidies. And actually a lot of free trade agreements will kind of place limits on the subsidies you can provide for exactly this reason. And then for a diagram, I'm just including this, which is a standard subsidy diagram where you can see that the subsidy lowers the costs and increases overall output in the economy, which I think is very important. Well, it's quantities for the specific market, but that's effectively because firms are producing more. So I think, again, you can show this as a reflection of the fact that subsidies are allowing firms to achieve increased output. This is also good for consumers because you're lowering prices. So I think you could also mention that in your analysis. And then for my evaluation, I might point out firms may face significant challenges, poor infrastructure, uneducated workforces, lack of tech, all of which would stop them from being able to compete even with subsidies. And another drawback maybe is like governments may lack financing for this kind of spending, so bad for government deficits / debt. Right, so this again, it's sort of macroeconomic objectives trade-offs that we can bring in for the evaluation to argue, well, maybe subsidies aren't actually the greatest idea in the world. And then for the development of human capital, my analysis is going to be, starting with government investment in healthcare and education. That's going to lead to lower burdens on government in the long run as healthcare improves. It's also going to lead to higher rates of labor productivity. And that's both because of the higher level of education, but it's also because people are, going to have longer life expectancies. They're going to be more productive. They're going to be healthier. They'll miss fewer days due to sickness. So you overall get more labor productivity, and unit costs of labor go down. This could attract investment and boost LRAS, raising the ceiling on our economy's productive capacity, right? So for the diagram, then I'm showing this long run aggregate supply with AD curve, where I'm showing an increase in long run aggregate supply that comes from providing this kind of investment. And the hope here is that we're kind of raising the ceiling of the economy. We should be increasing economic growth over the long run because we're raising the capacity of what we can produce in our economy. For evaluations, I'm going again for I could make a similar point, right, about cost. I wouldn't want to do this for both, but if I've not made it for the first one, I can make it for the second. So it could be government deficit, trade-offs with other government policies. I'd also mention maybe we could be crowding out private investment. I'd also think increases in LRAS may not meaningfully increase growth in the short run if AD is too low. So we kind of need both components to be firing to some extent for us to actually get meaningful economic growth. So one of the evaluations might be, well, all of this education is well and good, but if you have super low incomes and super low levels of aggregate demand, increasing LRAS is not actually going to dramatically increase your level of economic growth, certainly in the short run, but possibly also in the long run. In terms of judgment then, I might say both policies rely on each other to some extent. This is kind of a weird point, but what I'm saying basically is if we're just increasing our long run aggregate supply, we're not necessarily actually getting economic growth in the short run because we don't have that increase in AD. Maybe we don't have businesses that are actually taking advantage of the higher rates of education, the better technology, the higher investment. You actually need firms to be willing to utilize your better educated population. And equally, if your long run aggregate supply isn't very high because your infrastructure, healthcare, and education are too poor, then it doesn't matter how much subsidizing you provide because you don't have those foundational components and you're going to be limited by your long run aggregate supply. So you can push up AD and short-run aggregate supply all you want, but your actual rate of, you're going to create a positive output gap because you're pushing your equilibrium rate of economic growth, your output, beyond long-run aggregate supply. And that's probably just going to create inflation because you can't actually meet higher rates of demand, if that makes sense. So you need both components really to have meaningful economic growth. So, one example of this would be subsidies may not be effective if basic factors of production are not in place, like education and healthcare. LRAS would be a limiting factor on economic growth.